wind carries with it the bitter taste of ash and the bitter sting of frost. Beneath a sky bruised with storm clouds, the fortress stands like a forgotten titan, its stone walls weary from centuries of holding back the tides of war. The ground below is scarred from countless battles, muddy, churned by the heavy footsteps of soldiers and the unrelenting siege engines that have battered the gates for days. The scent of charred wood lingers, its acrid, burnt remnants rising like ghosts from the past. Above, the long bell of the siege tolls, its sound a solemn reminder of the impending doom. This is not a battle for glory. It is a battle for survival. Atop the highest tower of the castle, a knight stands alone, his silhouette barely visible against the gray sky. His armor is dulled by time and blood. Each dent in the metal is silent testimony to the years of conflict he has endured. He grips the edge of the battlement, his fingers stiff in the cold, his knuckles white. Beneath his boots, the stone feels cold and unforgiving, as if the very walls of the fortress are closing in on him. His eyes are fixed on the advancing army, their banners unfurling in the wind like the wings of vultures circling their prey. The sounds of war reach him faintly. The distant growl of war drums, the clash of weapons, the screams of the wounded. Yet it is a silence that haunts him most, the deep, oppressive silence that fills the spaces between the battles. The enemy is here at the gates, but they have not yet made their final move. It is as if they are waiting for something, watching him from the shadows. The knight's mind drifts back to the beginning of this journey, to the moment when he first swore his oath to protect the people of this land. He had been young then, eager for honor, seeking glory and the rewards of battle. His heart had burned with fire that was fueled by dreams of honor and fame, by the stories told around the flickering campfires of warriors who had become legends. But now, as he stands here on the precipice of what feels like an inevitable end, that fire has dimmed. Glory seems distant, like a faint star on a cloudy night. He remembers the day they first breached the outer walls, the day the enemy came like a storm. They had come with relentless fury, with a strength that had seemed insurmountable. At first, it had been a battle like any other, a clash of iron and steel, a game of strategy and blood. But now, it has become something far darker, a trial of endurance, a test of the soul. The knight is no longer fighting for victory. He is fighting to keep the fortress from falling, fighting to protect the lives of those who call this place home. The soldiers have become shadows, their faces gone from hunger, their eyes hollow with exhaustion. They are no longer the proud warriors they once were. They are survivors. His thoughts are interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps, the soft scrape of boots against stone. He turns slowly to find his commander, an older man whose face is creased with the weight of years and hardship. The commander's eyes are tired, but there is still a fire in them, a glimmer of the warrior he once was. The walls are holding, but not for long, the commander says, his voice low and grim. The enemy has brought in their siege engines. The gates will fall within the hour. The knight nods, his gaze returning to the distant army. And then we fight, the commander replies simply. We fight until the last man stands. That's all we can do now. The knight's chest tightens at the words. He has known this moment would come, yet it does nothing to prepare him for the finality of it. He has fought countless battles, faced death more times than he can count, but never before has it felt so certain, so unyielding. His thoughts turn to his comrades, men who had once been brothers in arms, who had laughed together around the campfire and shared stories of home. Now, they are little more than ghosts, their faces etched with the grim determination of men who know they will not survive the coming storm. As the commander turns to leave, the knight calls out to him. What about the people inside the castle? The women, the children? There is nothing more we can do for them, the commander replies quietly. They will have to fend for themselves. The words are a bitter pill to swallow. The knight knows that there are families within the walls, people who have never known a life beyond these castle gates. They have lived in peace, shielded by the walls that have kept them safe for generations. But now those walls are crumbling and there is no escape. The knight's heart sinks as he imagines the terror that will grip these innocent souls when the gates finally fall. There will be no mercy, no quarter. The enemy is relentless, their hunger for conquest insatiable. He thinks of the young boy he had spoken to earlier that day, a child no older than 10. The boy had asked him if they would win, his eyes filled with a naive hope that the knight could not bring himself to shatter. The knight had smiled, ruffled the boy's hair, and told him that everything would be fine. But now, as the weight of his words presses down on him, he knows that he lied. There will be no happy ending here. The world will not be kind to them. The sound of a distant horn pierces the air, sharp and clear. The enemy is moving. The knight can feel the ground beneath him tremble as the siege engines are rolled into place. The catapults creak as they are primed, their massive wooden arms stretching back, ready to unleash their deadly payload upon the castle walls. The first stone is launched into the air, a massive boulder that arcs across the sky like a comet. It lands with a thunderous crash, sending a shower of debris into the air. The walls shake, groaning under the impact. The knight can hear the shouts of the defenders below as they scramble to reinforce the crumbling defenses. But even as the first wave of destruction hits, he feels something stir within him, a flicker of something he cannot name. It is not fear nor is it hope. It is something deeper, more primal, a connection to the land, to the people he has sworn to protect. He can almost hear their voices in the wind, urging him on, reminding him of the duty he has carried for so long, the weight of his armor, the weight of his sword, the weight of his responsibility. All of it has led to this moment. He reaches down, his hand brushing the hilt of his sword. The blade is worn, its surface marred by countless battles, but it is still sharp. The weight of it feels right in his hand, as if it had become an extension of his very being. He lifts it from its sheath, the steel glinting in the dim light, and for a moment he is back on the battlefield of his youth. He can almost hear the clash of steel, the cries of victory, the roar of the crowd. But those days are gone now. There will be no victory here. The second stone hits with an ear-splitting crack, and the ground trembles again. The walls are beginning to splinter. The knight knows it will not be long before the gates are breached, and the castle will fall. He takes one last look at the battlefield below, at the men who are preparing for the final charge, at the women and children who are hiding in the shadows. He knows that his fate is sealed, that this is the end. But there is one final thing he must do. He turns and strides back toward the castle gates, his footsteps heavy with the weight of inevitability. Inside, the defenders are already gathering, their faces grim but resolute. The time has come to face the enemy, to stand against the storm. The knight knows that many of them will not survive, that the walls will fall, that the fortress will crumble. But as the enemy advances, he feels something stir in his chest, a flicker of defiance, of courage that will not be extinguished. He will not allow the fortress to fall without a fight. He will not allow the last memory of this place to be one of surrender. And so, with one final unspoken vow, he raises his sword to the sky, ready to face the coming storm. The siege may break the walls, but it will never break his spirit. He is the last guardian of the fortress, and he will stand until the very end. The wind howls relentlessly through the narrow corridors of the castle, carrying with it the scent of smoke and impending doom. The once proud fortress, now battered by weeks of siege, seems to groan under the pressure of the enemy's relentless assault. Outside, the gray sky hangs heavy with clouds, casting a sickly pallor over the battlefield. The sounds of war, the clanging of weapons, the cries of men locked in mortal combat, the rattle of siege engines, reach the walls like distant thunder. Yet it is the silence within the castle that speaks the loudest, a stillness that weighs heavily on the hearts of those who remain. At the heart of this crumbling fortress stands Queen Alara, her presence a quiet beacon of resolve amidst the chaos. Her golden crown, once gleaming and regal, now sits crookedly atop her head, its jewels dulled by the grime of war. Her once vibrant cloak, woven with the finest silks, is now frayed and torn, the edges stained with the blood of those who have fallen in defense of her kingdom. She stands alone in the throne room, her back to the flickering hearth, her face illuminated by the pale glow of the fire. Her hands, trembling with the weight of her crown, clutch the arms of her throne as she stares into the flames. In her eyes there is no fear, only a deep, all-encompassing sorrow. She has ruled this land for many years, guiding it through prosperity and peace. But now, as the enemy's armies close on the gates, her kingdom is on the brink of destruction. She is the last of her line, the final guardian of a dynasty that has ruled for centuries. Yet even with all her power, she knows at this time there will be no escape. The castle will fall, and her people will be lost. A knock at the door interrupts her thoughts, and she turns to find her trusted advisor, Lord Varen, standing in the doorway. His face is grim, his eyes tired. He has aged beyond his years in the time since the siege began, his once dark hair now streaked with silver. He steps forward, his boots echoing in the silence of the throne room. "Your Majesty," he says, his voice low and somber, "the enemy is at the gates. The walls will not hold for much longer. We have but hours, perhaps less." Illyra's gaze flickers to the stone walls of the throne room, the cracks that run like veins through the ancient structure. She knows he speaks the truth. The enemy has brought their full force to bear. Siege engines, archers, battering rams, and their assault has been unrelenting. Day by day, the castle's defenses have been worn down, and now, with the final blow about to land, Illyra feels the weight of the crown pressed down upon her like never before. "I know, Varen," she replies, her voice steady, but tinged with sorrow that cannot be hidden. "I know, but what of the people? What can we do for them?" The question hangs heavy in the air. The people of the kingdom, noble and peasant alike, have sought refuge within the castle walls. Women, children, the elderly, all have fled here in search of safety. The Queen's duty has always been to protect them, to keep them safe from harm. But now, with the enemy closing in, she is powerless to save them. Varen's eyes darken. There is nothing more we can do. The gates will fall, and with them, the last of our defenses. We must prepare for the worst. Illyra's heart aches at the words. She had never imagined that this would be her legacy. The queen who could not protect her people, who could not shield them from the inevitable storm that now rages outside the gates. She stands and walks toward the window, her fingers trailing over the cold stone of the wall, as she gazes out over the battlefield below. The sight that greets her is one she will never forget. The once beautiful landscape of her kingdom now marred by the signs of war. The fields that once bloomed with golden crops are now scorched and blackened, the remnants of burning villages scattered across the horizon. The enemy's army is a vast sea of men, their banners flapping in the wind like dark omens. They are a storm on the move, their siege engines rumbling forward, their catapults poised to strike. The sight of them is enough to send a chill through her bones. She knows they will not show mercy. "I cannot allow them to fall into their hands," Illyra whispers, more to herself than to Varen. "Not after all they have sacrificed." Varen steps forward, his face a mask of sorrow. "You cannot save them, Your Majesty. The walls are breaking. There is no hope of holding out much longer. We must face the truth." The words hit her like a physical blow. She has faced many challenges in her life, political intrigue, betrayals, wars, but none have felt as impossible as this. She has always been a symbol of hope for her people, the one who stood firm in the face of adversity. But now, with the walls crumbling and the enemy closing in, Illyra feels the weight of her own limitations. The mantle of leadership feels too heavy to bear. And yet, despite the overwhelming odds, she knows there is still something she can do. She turns to Varen, her gaze unwavering. "We will not surrender." Varen's eyes widen. "What do you mean?" "The people will not see their queen bend to the will of the enemy." Illyra says firmly, "We will make them fight. We will give them a final chance to defend what is theirs." The advisor hesitates, his brow furrowing in disbelief. "But the gates will fall. The city will be overrun. There is no way to stop them." "There is always a way," Illyra replies, her voice low, resolute. "I will lead them myself if I must. We will fight until the last breath." Varen looks at her for a long moment and then slowly nods. He knows better than anyone that once the queen has set her mind to something, there is no turning back. He bows his head, respect and sorrow in equal measure in his eyes. "As you wish, Your Majesty," he says softly. "I will gather the troops." Illyra stands in silence for a moment longer, her heart heavy with the weight of what must come. The queen knows that her decision will cost many lives, and yet she cannot bring herself to surrender. To her, surrender means abandoning her people, abandoning the very soul of the kingdom she has spent her life defending. The clash of swords and the pounding of war drums grow louder as the enemy's forces move ever closer. The time for words is over. Ilera turns away from the window and walks toward the castle's great hall, where the final preparations are being made. She steps through the thick wooden doors, her soldiers gathered in tense silence, their faces etched with fear, fatigue, and determination. They know what awaits them outside, death, defeat, and the destruction of everything they have fought for. But as Ilera enters, a hush falls over the room. The sight of their queen, her head held high, her face resolute, fills them with a new sense of purpose. She steps in front of the room, her eyes sweeping across the faces of the men and women who stood by her side through every trial. They have followed her without question, not because of her crown, but because of the trust they place in her leadership. Now, in their darkest hour, she must lead them once more. "We will not surrender," she says, her voice cutting to the tension like a sword. "We will fight with every last ounce of strength we have. We will not let them take this castle without a struggle. We are the defenders of this land, and we will die as such, if necessary, but we will never kneel to the enemy." Her words are met with a wave of determined nods, the soldiers straightening, their hearts stirring with renewed purpose. Ilera's gaze softens for a moment as she looks upon them. She knows they are tired, broken by the weeks of siege, but she also knows that they are not cowards. They are warriors, and they will fight until the very end. The sound of the enemy's siege engines drawing nearer fills the air, and Ilera takes a deep breath. There is no turning back now. The castle will fall, but her people will know that they fought with honor, that they did not go quietly into the night. And so, with the final toll of the bell echoing through the castle, Ilera takes her place at the front of the line, her sword drawn, her heart filled with a resolve that cannot be broken. The battle begins, and the fate of the kingdom hangs in the balance. There is no glory to be found in this fight. Only the bitter taste of sacrifice, the echoes of lives lost in the name of duty. But even in the face of certain defeat, Ilera stands as the last guardian of her kingdom, ready to defend it with everything she has. The moon hangs high above the battlefield, casting its pale light upon the twisted, blood-soaked earth below. A cold, biting wind sweeps across the land, carried with the stench of death and the echoes of the ongoing carnage. The once pristine green fields, now trampled by countless boots, have turned into a patchwork of mud and broken bodies. The distant cry of ravens fills the air, their dark wings flapping against the chill night as they circle overhead like harbingers of doom. The castle, which has stood as a symbol of strength and power for generations, now appears a hollow shell, its outer walls battered, its once imposing gates reduced to splintered wood. The firelight that flickers from the inner courtyard does little to push back the encroaching darkness. Within the castle walls, a small group of defenders gathers in the great hall. The room is filled with a heavy scent of smoke and the acrid tang of sweat and blood. The flickering light from a few scattered torches casts long, ghostly shadows on the stone walls, flickering like the last remnants of hope in the face of inevitable defeat. At the center of the room stands a woman, a peasant, no noble, no warrior by birth. She wears no crown, no glittering gown. Instead, she wears a rough-hewn tunic of someone who has spent her life working the fields, her hands calloused and her face sunburned from years under the harsh sun. Her hair is pulled back into a tight, practical braid, but her eyes, those eyes, are something else entirely. Eyes that have seen the darkest corners of humanity, eyes that carry the weight of 1,000 struggles, and eyes that now burn with a fierce, unwavering resolve. Her name is Kira, and she is the last hope of her people. Kira had never wanted to be a leader. She had never sought power, nor had she ever imagined that she would one day stand in the castle halls, commanding a ragtag group of soldiers. Farmers, blacksmiths, shepherds, and a few knights who had turned to fight for the people when the nobility had abandoned them. But here she was, the reluctant commander of a group that had once been nothing more than a handful of peasants struggling to survive in a world that had never cared for them. She had always known that this day would come. The land was ruled by a cruel lord, a man who had taxed the people into poverty, who had crushed every attempt at rebellion with brutal force. And now, the lord's army, under the banner of a foreign king, had descended upon the kingdom like a storm. The peasants had rallied together, fortified the castle, and vowed to defend their homes. But they were outnumbered, underequipped, and facing a force that had already overrun several neighboring villages. Their only hope lay in their will to fight and the leadership of a woman who had once been a simple farmer. The battle outside rages on, but inside the great hall, a silence has descended, a silence that fills the air with a heavy, palpable tension. Kira stands in the center of the room, her eyes scanning the faces of her fellow defenders. Their expressions are weary, haunted by the days of siege, by the endless struggle to keep the enemy at bay. Some of them are no more than boys, their faces still youthful despite the weariness in their eyes. Others are older, their graying hair a testament to the years they have lived, to the lives they have seen lost. But despite the exhaustion that drapes over them like a shroud, there is something else in their eyes, a fierce determination, a shared resolve that binds them together as one. They will not go quietly into the night. They will stand and fight, even if the odds are against them. Kira steps forward, her voice breaking the stillness like the crack of a whip. We fight for more than just these walls, she says, her voice carrying the weight of years of hardship. We fight for the land we've worked, for the families we've lost, for the children who will inherit this world. We fight for our lives, for our dignity, for our future, and we will not let them take that from us. Her words are met with a murmur of agreement, a ripple of solidarity that spreads through the room. The tension in the air lightens, if only slightly, as the defenders straighten their backs and square their shoulders. They are tired, but they are not broken. Not yet. The castle walls are crumbling, the outer defense is breached, and the enemy is drawing near. Kira knows that they're outmatched. The enemy's army is vast, well-equipped, and battle-hardened. They have come to claim what is theirs, and they will stop at nothing to achieve it. The defenders' weapons are crude, rusted swords, broken spears, and a few meager arrows, and their armor is little more than leather and scraps of metal. They cannot win by strength alone, but they can win by courage. Kira's mind races as she considers their options. The gates will fall soon, the walls will be breached, and the enemy will pour in like a flood. But there is one thing the enemy cannot take from them: their will to fight. Kira looks out the narrow window at the enemy's camp below. They have set up camp on the outskirts of the castle, their war machines looming like dark giants in the distance. The trebuchets are already in place, their massive arms creaking as they prepare to hurl stone and fire upon the castle walls. The defenders have no hope of stopping them, but Kira knows that there is something they can do. The gates will fall, she says, her voice steady and resolute. But we will not wait for them to break us. We will not wait to die behind these walls. We will go out there and make them remember who we are. The room falls silent. The weight of her words settles on the shoulders of the defenders, and for a moment, there is a palpable shift in the air. The men and women who have fought and bled for this castle, for this land, look at one another with new purpose in their eyes. Kira has given them something more than hope. She has given them a reason to fight, and that reason is enough. The enemy's siege engines rumble as they prepare to fire again. The walls shake with the impact of another stone striking the outer defenses, and Kira knows that time is running out. She looks to her trusted lieutenant, a former blacksmith named Rowan, who has become her closest ally in this war. His face is grim, his brow furrowed with the burden of their situation, but his eyes are filled with the same fire that burns within her. He understands. We will gather what we can, Rowan says, his voice low but firm. We will make one final charge. The gates may fall, but we will take down as many of them as we can before we go. Kira nods, her heart swelling with pride at the sight of the man she has come to see as a brother. Together, they lead the defenders out into the courtyard, where the last of the remaining soldiers prepare for the final assault. The air is thick with tension, and the distant crack of siege engines reminds them that time is slipping away. Kira looks to the horizon one last time. The enemy's banners flutter in the wind, their soldiers marching in orderly rows, their faces grim with the knowledge that victory is near. But Kira knows that even in the face of overwhelming odds, they have one thing that the enemy does not: the will to fight. With one final, resolute glance, Kira draws her sword, a crude, unrefined blade, but blade nonetheless, and raises it high. "For our homes, for our families, for our freedom," she cries, her voice ringing out across the courtyard. The defenders shout in unison, their voices carrying across the castle walls. And then, with a single motion, they charge, fighting not for survival, but for the chance to make the enemy pay for every life they've taken, for every home they've destroyed. The battle rages on. The walls fall. The gates are breached, but Kira and her warriors fight with ferocity that even the enemy cannot quell. They fight for their dignity, for the memory of those they have lost, and for the future that they will never see. And though the castle may fall, and though Kira may never see her homeland free again, she knows that in this final stand, they have made their mark upon history. They will be remembered, not for the walls they built, but for the courage they displayed in the face of insurmountable odds. The fog rolls in thick and heavy, swallowing the land beneath it like a slow, creeping tide. It lingers in the air, damp and oppressive, as if the very earth itself is holding its breath. The distant sound of hooves echoes through the valley, muffled by the dampness, while mournful cry of a lone wolf cuts through the stillness. The castle lies silent beneath the veil of mist, its stone walls darkened by the weight of years, its towers piercing the low-hanging clouds. Inside, the air is thick with the scent of burning wood, iron, and desperation. Atop the highest tower of the castle stands King Aldrich, his back to wind, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the enemy's banners flutter in the distance. His once proud armor is tarnished, the royal crest barely visible beneath layers of grime and blood. His gaunt face, lined with years of conflict, bears the weight of 1,000 decisions, each one of them a step closer to this final moment. His crown sits askew on his brow, no longer a symbol of power, but a burden he can no longer bear. His kingdom, which once stood as a beacon of wealth and glory, is now reduced to this, a crumbling fortress besieged by those who seek to strip him of everything he has ever known. The siege began weeks ago, at the dawn of autumn, when the first whispers of an enemy army began to circle the borders. At first, there had been hope that perhaps it was nothing more than a passing threat, a small force that could be repelled with ease. But as the weeks wore on, the enemy grew in number and ferocity, a storm gathering strength in the distance. Aldrich's advisors had urged him to abandon the castle, to retreat to the hills and seek refuge. But Aldrich had refused. His pride, once the foundation of his reign, had kept him anchored in place. He would not abandon his people. He would not let them see their king cower in the face of a threat. Now, as the enemy draws closer, the fog thickens, and the sound of battle drums reverberates faintly in the distance. The castle walls, once strong and impervious, are beginning to crack under the pressure. The trebuchets, the massive siege engines, have begun their slow march toward the gates. Stone after stone is hurled with brutal force against the castle walls, each impact shaking the very foundations of the stronghold. Inside, the defenders, tired, hungry, and disheartened, prepare for what is certain to be the final assault. Aldrich's thoughts are interrupted by the soft creak of the door behind him. He turns slowly to find his trusted general, Sir Leofric, entering the room. The man's face is drawn and weathered, his armor battered and stained from the relentless days of fighting. His eyes, though tired, are sharp with the clarity of a man who has seen too many battles, too many losses. "Your Majesty," Leofric says, bowing slightly, his voice low, "the walls will not hold much longer. The enemy is preparing to make their final push. They have brought up their rams, their catapults. It is only a matter of time before they breach the gates." Aldrich stands in silence for a moment, the weight of his general's words settling heavily on his chest. He had known this was coming, had felt it in the air, in the weight of the stone walls that seemed to groan with every passing hour. The siege had dragged on for so long that he had begun to forget what peace felt like, what life had been before the drums of war had first sounded. "I knew this day would come," Aldrich says quietly, his voice rough with weariness. "But I had hoped that it would not be under my watch." Leofric steps closer, his gaze steady but full of empathy. "Your Majesty, there was no avoiding this. The enemy was too powerful. We have held them off for longer than anyone thought possible. But now..." Aldrich's hand tightens around the hilt of his sword, the worn leather grip cool beneath his fingers. "I know," he interrupts, "and yet I cannot shake the feeling that I have failed them. My people, my family, I have failed them all." Leofric's expression softens. "You have done what you could. We all have. The battle is lost, but your leadership, your resolve, has kept us standing this long. That is no small feat. Aldrich looks out the fog, his mind drifting back to the early days of his reign. He remembers the celebrations, the feasts, the cheers of his people. He had been a young king then, eager and full of ambition. He had sought to expand his kingdom, to bring peace and prosperity to the lands under his rule. He had imagined a long, glorious reign. But now, as the enemy closes on his castle, those dreams seem like distant memories, fragile and unattainable. I once dreamed of leaving a legacy, Aldrich says, his voice distant, of building a kingdom that would stand for centuries, of being remembered as a wise and just ruler. But now, I will only be remembered as the king who lost everything. Leofric remains silent, allowing his king to speak. He knows that there are no easy words for a man in Aldrich's position, no comfort to be found in the shadow of impending defeat. He, too, feels the weight of the siege on his shoulders, but his duty is clear. He must prepare his king for the final push. The enemy will come soon, Leofric says, his voice steady. We will make our stand at the gates, as we have always planned. There is no other choice. Aldrich nods, his expression hardening with resolve. He may not have the strength to fight this battle alone, but he will die with dignity. His people will see that their king stood firm, even when all seemed lost. I will be there, Aldrich says. I will lead the charge. Leofric bows his head, his respect for his king deepening in this moment. He knows that Aldrich's decision is not born from pride, but from a sense of duty to the crown, to the people, and to the legacy of his ancestors. As the final preparations are made, the castle stirs with a quiet energy, a gathering of those who are willing to fight until the end. Aldrich walks to the halls of his home for the last time, his footsteps echoing in the vast, empty corridors. The tapestries that once adorned the walls now seem faded, their colors dull with age and the heavy weight of history. The banners that once flew high now hang limp, their edges torn by the winds of war. He passes the grand dining hall, where he had hosted dignitaries and nobles from far and wide, where laughter had once filled the air. Now, the room is silent, the long tables empty. In the courtyard, the soldiers gather in their final formation. Their faces are grim, their bodies tired, but there's a fire in their eyes, a fire that speaks a loyalty to their king, a loyalty that has not yet been extinguished. They know the odds are against them. They know the castle will fall, but they are determined to fight for their king, for their homeland, until the very end. Aldrich stands before them, his armor creaking as he raises his sword high. His voice, though weary, rings out clear and strong, a final rallying cry for those who have given everything to protect him. This is not the end, he says, his eyes sweeping over his soldiers, his voice filled with the weight of his responsibility. We may fall, but we will fall with honor. We will fight to the last breath. We will not let them take this kingdom without paying the price. His words are met with a resounding cheer, the sound of it rising up like a great, defiant roar in the face of certain death. The soldiers tighten their grip on their weapons, their resolve hardening like steel. The enemy's army is now visible on the horizon, their war machines rolling forward, their banners fluttering in the wind. The final siege has begun. The gates will soon be breached, and the enemy will pour into the castle like a flood. But as Aldrich looks out over his men, he realizes something. Even in the face of overwhelming odds, even in the shadow of certain defeat, there's something more powerful than the enemy's weapons. There's honor. There is the will to fight. And in the hearts of these soldiers, there is a loyalty to their king that will not break, no matter how dark the night becomes. The castle walls shake with the impact of the first stone hurled by the enemy's trebuchets. The earth trembles beneath their feet, and Aldrich feels the weight of the moment settle upon him like a cloak. He knows this is the end, but he will face it as he has always faced battle, with courage, with dignity, and with the pride of knowing that he fought for something greater than himself. And as the enemy's forces charge toward the castle gates, Aldrich raises his sword one final time, a symbol of the last stand of a king who would rather die on his feet than live on his knees. The setting sun casts a fiery glow across the horizon, painting the sky in shades of red and orange, the last light of the day seeming to bleed into the earth. But beneath that beautiful, deceiving sky, the land is darkened by smoke, Thick, heavy, black smoke billowing from the city, from the villages set aflame by the enemy's relentless siege. The air is filled with the acrid smell of burning wood, flesh, and desperation. The sound of battle are distant but unmistakable. The roar of catapults hurling flaming stones toward the walls, the shouts of men as they charge forward and fall back, the rhythmic beat of war drums calling the forces to battle. And all of it, seems to be swallowed by the heavy, oppressive silence within the gates of the castle. Sir Oswin, the commander of the castle's forces, stands at the gatehouse, his hands clenched tightly around the iron bars of the portcullis. His face is weathered, his eyes hollowed by the weight of the siege that has dragged on for weeks. The once mighty fortress, the stronghold that stood as a beacon of strength and pride for so many years, now looks like an old, dying thing. The walls are cracked, the towers shudder under the weight of the pounding from the siege engines, and the gates, once impenetrable, now show the scars of the enemy's brutal assault. Oswin's armor, though still sturdy, is marred with dirt, soot, and blood. His sword, the blade that had once been the symbol of his honor and his duty, feels heavier than ever. He stands with his back straight, facing the distant enemy forces beyond the broken walls of the castle, his gaze never leaving the advancing army. They are many, their banners flying high above their ranks, the men within them an unstoppable tide of destruction. But it is not the sheer number of the enemy that haunts Oswin. It is the knowledge that his men, his brothers in arms, are running out of time, out of food, and out of hope. The siege had begun 3 weeks ago, and the defenders, caught off guard by the swiftness of the enemy's movements, had quickly found themselves surrounded. Oswin had led the castle's forces valiantly at first, his heart full of courage and his sword sharp. But now, as the days wore on and the walls began to crumble, his resolve had begun to waver. His men had fought bravely, but they were growing thin from hunger and fatigue. Every day, it seemed, there were fewer of them. Every hour, another soldier fell, another man was lost to the brutality of war. And yet, despite the mounting odds, Oswin cannot bring himself to retreat. He cannot abandon the people inside the castle, those who have placed their faith in him, those who look to him as their protector, their savior. He will not leave them to the mercy of the enemy. But even as the enemy's catapults send their payloads of fire and stone crashing against the castle's gates, Oswin knows that the time to make a decision is near. The walls are breached, the outer defenses are gone, and soon the enemy will pour like a wave, overwhelming everything in their path. The gates will fall, and the city will be lost. Oswin has a choice now: surrender or fight until the last man stands. A soft cough interrupts his thoughts, and Oswin turns to see his trusted squire, a young man named Aemon, standing just behind him. Aemon's face is pale, his eyes wide with fear, but his posture is proud. He holds a bucket of water in his hands, though his grip trembles slightly, betraying his nerves. "Sir Oswin," Aemon says, his voice strained, "the men are waiting for your orders. They need you. We all need you." Oswin nods slowly, the words weighing heavily on his chest. He has known this moment was coming. He has known that he could not keep his men trapped within the castle forever. They had no supplies left, no reinforcements, no hope of surviving a prolonged siege. And yet, to surrender now would be a dishonor he cannot bear. He cannot face his king or the families of his men, knowing he gave up without a fight. "Tell them to gather in the courtyard," Oswin replies, his voice low but firm. "We will make our stand there, at the gates." Aemon hesitates, looking at him with wide eyes, his expression a mixture of confusion and fear. "But, sir, the gates are broken. The walls are coming down. We cannot stop them. The enemy is too powerful. We must consider surrender, for the sake of the people." Oswin's heart aches at the words, but he stands tall. "There is no surrender, Aemon. Not while I have breath in my body. We fight. We fight for what remains. We fight for the honor of those who came before us." The squire looks as if he wants to argue, but instead he nods, his face falling into a grim expression. He sets the bucket aside and turns to leave, but not before placing a hand on Oswin's shoulder. The gesture is small, but it carries with it a sense of trust, of loyalty. It is the touch of a young man who does not yet understand the full weight of duty, but who feels it in his heart nonetheless. Oswin stands alone for a moment longer, the sound of the enemy's drums now growing louder as they prepare for the final charge. The ground beneath his feet trembles with the weight of their approach. He watches as the smoke from the fires rolls over the battlefield, turning the air thick with ash and heat. The sky is darkening now, the first stars barely visible through the smoke. The world feels smaller now, more confined, as if the siege is closing on him in more ways than one. He has no illusions about what comes next. The enemy will break through the gates. They will pour into the castle, and his men will fall one by one. There will be no escape, no victory. And yet, as he looks out over the battlefield, Oswin feels something stirring within him, a quiet, burning sense of resolve. He will not go down without a fight. He will not allow his kingdom to be consumed without standing against it. In the courtyard, the men gather in silence, their armor clanking softly as they take their positions. There are fewer of them now, their faces haggard from the days of fighting. Some of them are too young to have ever seen battle, while others are old veterans who have known the bloodshed of war for many years. All of them are tired, broken, but they are not defeated. Not yet. Oswin walks among them, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. He knows they are afraid. He knows they fear the coming onslaught, but he also knows that they will fight. For him, for the castle, for the people inside the walls who cannot defend themselves. When he reaches the front of the line, he turns to face them, his eyes scanning the men who have followed him so far. Their eyes meet his, and he sees in them what he has always known to be true. These men are not just soldiers. They are his brothers, his comrades. They have bled together, fought together, and now they will die together. But they will not die in vain. Brothers, Oswin says, his voice steady and strong, today we stand against the tide. Today we make our final stand. We will not be remembered as men who surrendered. We will be remembered as men who fought, who gave everything to protect the people we swore to defend. We fight not for glory, not for honor, but for the very soul of this land. A murmur ripples through men, their eyes alight with a fire that had seemed to have dimmed. They grip their weapons tighter, their posture straightening with the certainty of men who have found their purpose again. Oswin raises his sword high, the blade gleaming in the fading light. For the kingdom, for the people, for the memory of those who have fallen. For the kingdom! The men shout in unison, their voices ringing out like a battle cry, shaking off the weariness of weeks of siege. They raise their weapons, their shields, their hearts now filled with a renewed sense of purpose. Oswin leads them to the gates. He stands at the forefront, his heart pounding in his chest, his mind clear. The sound of the enemy's approach is deafening now, the ground shaking beneath their feet as the final assault begins. The gates break open, the enemy's forces flooding into the castle courtyard. The men of the castle fight valiantly, but they are outnumbered, their strength waning. And yet they fight, each blow struck with finality that speaks of duty and sacrifice. In the chaos of the battle, Oswin fights with all his might, his sword flashing in the dim light. But in his heart, he knows that the end is near. The enemy is too powerful. The gates are fallen, and as the castle crumbles around him, Oswin feels the weight of his decision. He has fought until the last breath, and in that he has found his peace. The night falls like a cloak, thick with the weight of impending doom. The once vibrant sky, now stained with the blood-red hues of twilight, stretches endlessly above the battlefield, where the battle rages on in its final throes. In the distance, the enemy's war drums continue their relentless beat, a sound that vibrates through the very earth beneath the feet of the defenders. The air smells of smoke, of burning villages, charred wood, and the acrid stench of blood that clings to the skin of the dying. The horizon is obscured by the haze of war, where flames lick the edges of the land and the cries of the fallen echo in the wind. At the heart of the castle, a single figure stands on the ramparts, gazing out the destruction unfolding below. The cold wind tugs his tattered cloak, but he does not flinch. Sir Magnus, once a knight of great renown, now a shadow of the man he used to be, stands alone on the highest tower. His once gleaming armor is now battered and broken, the polished silver dulled by years of combat and the toll of the siege. His face, once handsome and filled with youthful arrogance, is now haggard, marked by the passage of war and the weight of countless defeats. Magnus had been a hero once, a man whose name was whispered in reverence throughout the kingdom. He had fought for the king, for honor, and for glory. His sword had cut through the hearts of countless foes, and his victories had been celebrated in the courts and halls of nobility. But now, standing at the edge of the battlefield, he is a forgotten relic of a time that seems long past. The enemy has laid siege to the castle for days, weeks, even, and the defenders are weary. They are outnumbered, underfed, and demoralized. The walls, once a symbol of strength and security, are now cracked and broken, and the once proud gates have been battered down by the relentless pounding of the enemy's siege engines. Magnus knows that the end is near. The enemy is on the verge of overwhelming the last bastion of defense, and there is nothing left but the final, desperate charge. Behind him, the great hall is eerily quiet. The last of the defenders have gathered in the courtyard, their faces grim and hollow with the weight of their circumstances. These are not the men of legend. These are not the warriors who had once fought side by side with Magnus in the great battles of the past. These are broken soldiers, farmers, blacksmiths, and craftsmen, now armed with whatever they could find to defend their homes. Their courage is evident, but their fear is palpable. They know what is coming, and they know that they will not survive. A rustle behind him draws Magnus' attention, and he turns to find his squire, young Alaric, standing in the doorway of the tower. The boy's face is pale, his eyes wide with a terror that only a youth who has never seen the true horrors of war can understand. Alaric is trembling, his hand gripping the hilt of the sword far too large for him, his fingers pale with strain. "Sir Magnus," Alaric says, his voice shaking. "The men, they're waiting for you. They need you." Magnus turns slowly, his eyes locking with the squire's. For a long moment, he says nothing, his gaze filled with something far beyond the exhaustion that weighs on his bones. There is a deep, unspoken sorrow in his eyes, a sorrow that has been accumulating for years, ever since the fateful day that began his fall from grace. "I am no longer the man I once was, Alaric," Magnus says quietly, his voice hoarse from days of shouting orders and fighting on the front lines. "The men are waiting for a hero, but I am no hero anymore. I have failed them. I have failed myself." The boy steps forward, his face a mask of confusion and concern. "No, Sir Magnus, you are still our knight. You still have honor. We need you now, more than ever." Magnus turns back to face the battlefield, the weight of his memories pressing on his chest like a vice. He thinks of the young, idealistic knight he once was, before the war, before the betrayal, before the countless battles that had slowly chipped away at his spirit. He had been a man of ideals, a man who believed in the glory of combat, in the nobility of the king's cause. But now, standing on the edge of everything he had fought for, he no longer knows what honor truly means. Still, he cannot let go. He cannot abandon them, not when they are so close to the end. With a heavy sigh, Magnus pulls the sword from his side, the steel ringing softly as it slides free from its sheath. He looks at the blade for a long moment. An ancient weapon, once sharp and full of purpose, now dull and scarred from years of use. It is a weapon that has seen more death than any man should ever bear witness to, and yet here it is, still in his hand, still in his grasp. "You're right, Alaric," Magnus says, his voice gaining strength. "I may have failed many times, but I will not fail them now. I will not let this castle fall without a fight." The squire's eyes brighten with a flicker of hope, and he nods enthusiastically. "We will fight, sir. We will die together, but we will die with honor." Magnus smiles faintly, his hand resting on Alaric's shoulder for a moment before he turns and heads toward the stairs. His legs are stiff with fatigue, his muscles sore from the constant battle, but his resolve has hardened. He may be broken, but he is not done. As he steps into the courtyard, the men fall silent. They turn to face him, their eyes filled with a mix of admiration and desperation. They know what Magnus represents. He is the last of the old guard, the last of the knights who fought for something greater than themselves. To them, he is a symbol of strength, of the will to keep fighting even when all hope is lost. The wind carries the faint sound of the enemy's drums to their ears, the rhythmic thrum growing louder with each passing moment. The gates have been breached. The enemy will soon pour in. There is no retreat, no escape. Magnus knows this, but he also knows that he will not stand by and let the last of his kingdom fall without a final stand. He raises his sword high, the blade catching the last rays of the setting sun. His voice rings out across the courtyard, steady and strong. "We stand together as brothers," he cries. "We fight not for ourselves, but for those who cannot fight. We fight for our families, for our homes, and for the memory of all that we once were. Today we make our stand. Today we show them that we will not go quietly into the night. We will fight until the last man, until the last breath." The men raise their weapons in unison, their voices rising in a roar that echoes across the castle walls. Magnus feels it, the power of their unity, their collective will to stand and fight. It is the same fire that had burned in his own heart long ago, and it is still alive in them, despite the odds, despite the endless days of suffering. Magnus looks at the men, his brothers in arms, and he knows that they will not give up. They will not surrender. They will die on their feet, fighting for everything they hold dear. "Charge!" Magnus commands, his voice ringing through the night. With that single word, the men surge forward, their steps heavy with the knowledge that they are marching toward their end. But there is no fear in their hearts. There is only the fire of defiance, the flame of resistance that will burn until their last breath. Magnus leads them, sword raised, his heart pounding in his chest. The enemy's forces close in on them, a wall of steel and flesh, their ranks stretching as far as the eye can see. But Magnus does not falter. He charges into the fray, his sword cutting to the enemy's ranks, his body moving on instinct, driven by the knowledge that this will be his final battle. The fight is brutal. The sounds of battle fill the air. Clashing steel, cries of pain, the sound of men falling. The courtyard is alive with chaos, with the frantic movements of soldiers struggling to hold their ground. Magnus fights with everything he has left. Each swing of his sword, each blow struck, is a defiance of the inevitable. His body aches, his limbs grow heavy, but he does not stop. He cannot stop. And then, in the midst of the chaos, a flash of light, a sword, a blow that strikes true. Magnus feels a sharp pain as the blade sinks into his side, and for a moment, everything goes black. But even as his body crumples to ground, even as the light fades from his eyes, Magnus knows that he has done what he set out to do. He has fought until the end. He has fought for the last remnants of his kingdom, for the honor of his name, and for the memory of the man he once was. The morning light breaks over the desolate landscape, pale and uncertain, as if the sun itself is reluctant to rise. A heavy mist rolls across the field surrounding the castle, its tendrils creeping slowly up the broken walls like the fingers of death reaching for its prey. The distant echoes of battle can still be heard, faint but unmistakable. The sounds of men fighting and dying, the clash of metal against metal, the roar of the enemy's siege engines as they unleash their destructive payloads. Yet, within the confines of the castle's inner sanctum, there is a strange, suffocating stillness. Sir Roland, once a knight of legendary renown, sits alone in the dimly lit chapel of the castle, his back hunched beneath the weight of his armor. The sacred candles flicker weakly in their holders, casting long, trembling shadows on the stone walls. The smell of incense lingers in the air, thick and cloying, a poor attempt to mask the stench of blood and smoke that has filled the hall for days. His sword rests at his side, its blade dulled by the bloodshed of the past weeks. His once pristine armor is battered and scorched, the heraldry of his noble house barely visible beneath the grime and soot of war. Roland stares at the altar, his eyes vacant, lost in the quiet despair that has settled within him. His heart aches, not from the wounds that cover his body, but from the burden of the choices he has made. The castle is lost. The gates have been breached, the outer walls torn down, and the enemy is only moments away from flooding into the heart of the keep. His men are dead or dying, their bodies scattered across the field outside, their sacrifices meaningless in the face of this overwhelming force. He had sworn an oath, long ago, to protect the kingdom, to defend his king and his people. He had fought valiantly in countless battles, earning the admiration of his peers and the love of the people. But now, As the enemy closes in, that oath feels like a mockery. There is no victory here. There is no honor in this. His strength has failed him, his resolve broken, and the kingdom he once swore to protect will soon be no more. As the wind howls outside, the chapel door creaks open, and a figure steps inside. It is a squire, Aemon, a boy who had followed Roland since his early days as a knight, a young man full of dreams and ideals. Aemon's face is drawn, his eyes tired and hollow with the weight of the siege, but there is still a glimmer of the youthful hope that had once been in his gaze. "Sir Roland," Aemon says softly, his voice a mixture of reverence and despair. "The men are waiting for you. We still have a chance to fight. We can make our stand at the gates. The enemy may be strong, but we still have our swords. We can die with honor." Roland looks up slowly, his face twisted with sorrow that runs deeper than any wound. He watches Aemon with distant eyes, noting how the boy's hands tremble, how the weight of the situation is beginning to break him as well. The boy had been with him since the beginning of the siege, had fought beside him through every skirmish, every attack. And now, like everyone else, Aemon is starting to realize the truth of their situation. "We cannot win this battle, Aemon," Roland replies, his voice hoarse and broken. "The enemy is too strong. We are too few. There is no glory in fighting a battle we cannot win. The castle is lost. The kingdom is lost. Our deaths will not change that." Aemon's eyes widen with disbelief, his grip tightening on the hilt of his sword. "But we must fight, Sir Roland. We cannot surrender. We cannot let them take everything we have fought for, everything we have loved, without giving them a fight." Roland's eyes soften at the boy's words. The fire that once burned within him, that same fierce determination that had made him a hero in the eyes of his people, flickers weakly in his chest. But it is fading, and he knows it. He had once fought for glory, for honor, for the kingdom. But now, all that remains is the weight of his failures, the memories of lives lost, the faces of men he had failed to protect. "You are right, Aemon," Roland says finally, his voice steadying. "We cannot surrender. Not yet. But we will fight for something more than just ourselves. We fight for those who have died, for the legacy of our fallen comrades. And we fight for the hope that, even in our final moments, we may inspire those who survive to carry on the struggle." A long silence follows, and Aemon, though his face is still pale with fear, stands a little straighter. There is no more time for speeches, no more time for hope. The enemy is at the gates, and the final charge is upon them. Roland rises slowly, his armor clanking with each movement as he reaches for his sword. It feels heavier than it ever has, the weight of it dragging at him like a chain. But he does not hesitate. This is his duty. This is the last duty he will ever perform. The two of them leave the chapel together, stepping out into the cold, smoky air of the castle courtyard. The men are already assembled, waiting with grim faces, their eyes hollow from days of fighting and deprivation. They look to Roland, waiting for him to lead them, to inspire them to one last stand. "Brothers," Roland calls out, his voice echoing in the courtyard. "We may be outnumbered, we may be broken, but we will not let this castle fall without a fight. We will not let our homes be desecrated without standing against them. We will die with honor for the kingdom, for our families, for the memory of those who have already fallen." The men raise their weapons in unison, their faces hardening with resolve, though their eyes betray their fear. There is no more bravado here, only the cold, grim determination of men who know that death is certain, but who will face it with as much dignity as they can muster. Roland leads them to the gates, the very gates that have been battered by the enemy's siege engines for days. The gates are now little more than a few broken splinters of wood, held together by the friliest of hinges. The enemy is only moments away from storming through. Yet, in these last moments, Roland feels a flicker of something inside him, something that had been dormant for far too long. His purpose, his duty, the man he used to be. The men charge forward, their swords raised high, their hearts filled with the last of their courage. They fight like men possessed, knowing that there is no retreat, no surrender, no second chance. Roland is at the front, leading the charge, his sword flashing through the smoke, his face set in a grim line. He moves with the precision and skill of a knight who has fought countless battles, though each step is heavier than the last. But the enemy is too many. The gates fall, and the defenders are overwhelmed. Roland fights with everything he has left, his blade flashing in the chaos, his heart pounding in his chest. His vision fades, the world narrowing as his sword cleaves through the enemy ranks. The noise is deafening, the sounds of battle and death swirling around him. And then, amidst the chaos, a blow strikes true. Roland feels a sharp pain as a blade finds its mark, the world spinning as he collapses to ground, his vision fading to darkness. The last thing he sees before his world goes black is the face of Aemon, rushing forward to his side, his eyes filled with fear and sorrow. In that moment, Roland knows. He has failed, but at least he has fought. At least he has given everything for his men, for his kingdom, for the honor of his name.